This chapter of our inquiry and musing into poetry and some ancient texts has to do with a moment that will live forever in my head, in my heart. I knew at the moment that it was a moment bigger than itself. Sometimes, we recognize those moments, little moments of epiphany. And I did mention it last week, but it's worth mentioning again, about the mother of a bat mitzvah who, on a troubled afternoon for her, came into my office and sat perched on the edge of my couch, all tense and worried that she was going to have to help her child by reading the parashah of the week and discussing things about which she had no idea and no ideas and no critical way of approaching. And she said to me, I have no earthly idea about God. I have no earthly idea about God. And that seemed to me to be a compelling phrase. It was interesting. It was ironic. And it seemed like she had put her finger on exactly what she was missing. So that's the theme, really. How do conceptions of God, how do relationships with God through prayer, through experience, through the doors that are the passages of our lives, how is it that they grow out of fundamental experiences and understandings of how it is that we move and growing from our naivete or from our fascination and our questions into something else. And if a theological or a philosophical system is to be built on them, then so be it. But Jews don't do systematic theology so well. That's something that my students in the Duke Divinity School yearn for, a world where they don't have to worry about systematic theology. A systematic theology trying to explain things bit by bit in some absolute and certain way strikes me, I get to the title of this particular installment of our journey, it strikes me as being, I don't know, theology and meteorology combined. I really see them as being in some way parallel. Theology and meteorology both come to describe phenomena that have not yet occurred, to predict, to have models within which certain natural or transnatural or supernatural powers will operate. What can you expect of this high front or this low? What can you expect of God in the ancient world? A system of sacrifices, a system of alliances, allegiances, covenants, vows, commandments. What can you expect such that God will behave a particular way if you behave a particular way? Does that ever work? Does it always work? How are we supposed to, or are we supposed to be able to predict? Are we supposed to be able to predict the weather? Meteorology will tell you with absolute certainty why it stormed last night, even if they didn't predict it the day before, because the day after they have all of the data and they can describe it and in some ways confirm the exactitude of their science, but it doesn't really help them when it comes to predicting, except a little bit, perhaps. I don't mean to be putting down meteorology, but I do like the comparison nonetheless. In retrospect, you can describe things. Prospectively, it's difficult. And so I referred to this particular chapter of our inquiry as Theology and Meteorology, the weather of God, W-H-E-T-H-E-R. Well, whether or not, is whether or not. Is there God? Is there not God? Can we predict how it is that God is going to work? What's the God? Who's the God whom you would like to have? If you could write, as a friend of mine recently told me, an assignment was given to her, write a want ad. Write a want ad for the God that you would like to have. What does that person, what does that God look like? How does that God respond? And so I thought to share with you a poem called Theologia Yehudit, Jewish Theology, a poem by Yehuda Amichai. And I think we'll read the poem. I know some of you have read the poem, but you know what? I've said it before and we'll say it again. Jews are really good at chazara. You know, we're really good at doing things over and over and over again. I read the same parshiot year after year. The scroll rolls from the left hand to the right hand and then back to the left hand again. And we read, but we get something new and something different each time. And the same thing is true with any other texts that probe the spirit and give us the incentive to figure out something a little bit more about ourselves and our relationship with the tradition. So here is a poem called Jewish Theology. I think we'll go right to the English and then come back and investigate the Hebrew where that's necessary. All right? Thank you. That's good. Jewish theology. Theo. In my youth, I knew a boy whose name was Theodore, like Herzl, but his mother called him Theo. Theo, come home from the playground. Theo, don't hang around with bad kids. Theo, log, yeah. A rousing first stanza. I want a God who is seen but does not see, who can lead around in order to tell him about that which he does not see, whom I can lead around in order to tell him about that which he does not see. And I want a God who is seen and who sees. I want to see how he covers his eyes like a child playing blind man's bluff. I want a God like a window that if I open it, I will see the heavens while myself staying in the house. I want a God who is like a door that opens only outward. But God is like a door that swings on its hinge, in and out, and continues to swing through its arc without beginning, without end. Again, Jewish theology. Jewish theology. Theo. In my youth, I knew a boy whose name was Theodore, like Herzl, but his mother called him Theo. Theo, come home from the playground. Theo, don't hang around with bad kids. Theo, log, yeah. Well, we'll stay with that stanza for a little bit. And I'm going to take off the glasses. I had cataract surgery a week ago. And only one eye is, fixed, let's say. But I can see a lot of things now. And even the small font on the page that allows for all of your faces to be present, I can basically see that too. Whereas 2 weeks ago, I was taking off my glasses and cleaning them every 30 seconds because I thought that was the problem, but that wasn't the problem. It was the cataracts that had finally occluded my vision. I knew they were coming. I knew they were there, but they finally reached a place where they needed some attention. And so now one of them has been attended to. And in another couple of weeks, the other one. So we get to stay with the first stanza for a little bit. What do you think? Any thoughts about this first stanza? Theo. Theo. Do you know anybody whose name is Theo, by the way?
Theology?
Who?
Part of Bethel?
Yeah. There's a Bethel member whose name is Theo. Yeah. And of course, it is a Greek word that means God. Theos. Theodore. Theodore means a gift from God, God's gift. Theo.
I knew a woman named Theo.
You did?
Yes. I think it's just, I don't know, he's having fun here in this first stanza with Theology at the end of that. God doesn't hang around with bad kids type of thing. It's interesting. It's just, it seems like a fun, it's not serious. It's
well, that last
line.
The last line.
Theologia. Theologia. Theology. Is it ya or is it ye? Theology. But it's also, what would it be in Hebrew? I guess I could go back, but.
Theologia. Theologia.
Okay. So that fits, the theologia fits better.
Yeah. He is in some ways deconstructing this word, which is not a Hebrew word. There is no word in Hebrew for theology. There is no word in biblical Hebrew for religion, in fact.
So then, if I may ask, then often, I guess then it's borrowed, right? I mean, this is in Hebrew, modern Hebrew borrows what it needs to borrow. But they chose to borrow, someone who chose to borrow the Greek word and not to create something from the biblical Hebrew, which that is very interesting, I think, unto itself.
Yeah.
That they didn't take something from the Torah. That theology is somehow outside the Torah. It's somebody else's imposition on it then.
Yeah, it's a theoretical construct that comes from outside, and it moves into a prominent place in a new culture and civilization that comes and dominates. And it has some interesting overlays in terms of belief, in terms of cult, in terms of prayer and ritual, and so on. It's compelling, but at its core, it does not tally exactly with Judaism. We do end up with the word dat, which is taken to mean religion, but theology as a framework, we don't see that. We don't have an attempt to do that in any kind of in all kinds of weather, WHETHER, trying to describe it. We just don't see it. The God of the Talmud, the God of the stories, the God of the Bible is different, has different faces. Is the God of Pesach the same as the God of Purim? We might ask ourselves. Is the God of Shavuot the same God as the God of Shemini Atzeret or Rosh Hashanah? We might ask ourselves, what are the characteristics, and do they overlay completely? How does that play itself out in lived experience?
I guess that goes along also with something you have talked about in the past, is the God of, say, Genesis the God of Genesis and the characteristics of the young God of Genesis and the little older, more experienced God of Exodus, and keep, as we keep going, the theological evolution, theo-evolution.
Yes, yes.
What is the theology of youth?
Oh, theology of youth,
Yeah.
of youth.
Well, I think that I actually have read the poem before or studied it with you, and it never sort of dawned on me. The first part that was so playful is really just the background for the second part. Here's the mother inside her house, looking through the window or door. Hey, you come inside. Stop playing with the bad kids. Stop being out on the playground and come in. I want you to come in here. The same that she or he wants with the God. I want a God who is seen, and I want to be able to look out the window, opening the window but not going out, and the God that can come in and out. So almost like the child, you almost feel like the person writing it has God maybe on a leash or something, in and out, and I want you close, but not too close. But I want to protect you, and I want you to protect me.
Well, you are getting into this issue of how you write the want ad. What is the God? I want a God who, if I could construct a God, this is how I would construct that God. So you're moving into that, which takes us into another whole part of the poem. But I think, Sibby, you're also getting at something that's pretty essential here, which is the domestication of God. Theo, come home. I want you in the house. I don't want you playing with those bad kids. Theo, God, I want you in the house where I can keep an eye on you. I don't want those other influences in your life. I don't want anybody to call you by any other nicknames. It's maybe bad enough you got a Greek nickname, Theo. It becomes part of the popular culture, that name, Theo, Theodore. And people give that name without a blink of an eye. And Jean, how about the last line of that stanza? That's pretty interesting. The way and the way in which you add some color to it, and it sounds a little bit like a football game, like halftime at a football game, or a parade or something, Playing with the word teo, log, ya. If we look back at the Hebrew for a minute, if we can do that, you might see something interesting. Yeah, we will. If you take a look at the first word, theologia, pardon the fact that there's no dot in the tav at the beginning, and the initial letter, there should be, theologia. But if you look at the ya part of it, the last part, if you're a Hebrew reader, you look at the ya part of it, you'll see something different there than if you look at Amichai's deconstructed line at the end of the stanza. Do you detect a difference?
There's a dot in there.
Yes, there's a dot in there. And that dot always indicates that we're talking about Yud He Vav He. That right. Always means Adonai. Right? It's a condensation of a four-letter name in the He. Yeah, the dot in the He that is not present in the last letter of the word theologia, but is present in his cheer or his refrain of a Beatles song, Teo, Teo, Log, yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, however it is that he is doing it, he's giving us, this is serious. He's the one, Amichai is the one who put that mapik in the hay. He's the one who put the dot in the hay there. He wants us to understand that that is the divine name in its most condensed and serious form in Jewish tradition. So Theo, the Greek name, general name for God, and Yah at the end, this very concentrated name, which is the Jewish name for God, are balanced. And in the middle, Log. I don't know that he ever has tried to assign a meaning for that or to make a sentence out of it. Rather, he's playing with the word. How do you play with that word? Well, Teo, Teo, here's a thread over here, a little floater. I had a friend whose name was Teo, and his mother kept yelling for him to come home and so on. Don't stay out there with the bad kids and play. And then at the end, deconstructing the word altogether. How much meaning does the word theology have in Jewish tradition? Teo, Teo, Log, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Fact that, you know, when I was a kid, I liked it that my mother would call me home. That, you know what I mean? That there was something so warm and lovely about her saying, come back, you know, playtime is over and you can come inside. And so there's also this other meaning to the mother character calling Theo back, like she wants him home in a loving way. I mean, I know part of her doing, you know, like a silly, harassing way, but also something caring there.
That's very lovely. That's very lovely. Something wonderful and warm about that the mother really does want Theo to be in a particular way, in a particular context.
Mm-hmm.
And that it is, it's not angry or demanding or harsh or filled with trepidation or fear, but rather with love. And there are interesting Talmud stories that would make that very interesting point.
Mm-hmm.
One of these stories begins with God praying. God prays. And one of the Talmud masters says to the other, well, what does God pray? And the answer is, God prays that may it be my own will, because after all, who would God be praying to otherwise? May it be my own will that my attribute of mercy outweigh my attributes of justice.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the next paragraph of the story, when the high priest comes into the Holy of Holies, God says to the high priest, oh, thank me, you're here. I need you to give me a blessing. Give me a bracha. And the high priest's bracha is the same as God's prayer. May your attribute of compassion outweigh your attribute of justice. I know you can do it. I know you can do it. You've done it before. I know you can act that way. I really need for you to act that way. That's what I hear you saying. Come home. Come home. Boa baita, Teo. Come home. Come to this place where we've consolidated our understanding of your behavior and where you have demonstrated that which is kind and gracious and good, and that's what we need and that's what we want. But that's really a nice way of describing the dynamic between the mother and Theo.
Yeah, and can I say something?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, what you mentioned earlier about deconstructing. So in the first word, Theology, as you said, there's no dot in there. And it's really more like the study of God as a cold subject with really, just something you study to learn what you might not know But then interjected with that is what you just were talking about, the mother, the warmth, come home. I don't want you to be in trouble. I want you to be here with me. And then ending with that Theo, but then divorcing Yah from the word and then saying it's God and saying it 3 times, like emphasizing. So just like, it just like kind of more real, not cold, not just some study, but something closer to the heart, perhaps. I'm not sure how to take it much further than that.
Well, that's very nice. It's filled with experience. It's got something in the center, let's say. There's something in the center. Well, let's get on to the want ad, I suppose. I want a God who is seen but does not see, whom I can lead around in order to tell him about that which he does not see. And I want a God who is seen and who sees. I want to see how he covers his eyes like a child playing blind man's bluff. That's a stanza with some power and emotion to it, it seems to me. What do you think?
I remember this one from before, and I just really struck me that this idea of God is just about the diametric opposite of the traditional idea of God who sees but is not seen. Perhaps the idea is a warmer, friendlier image of God.
Right. Oftentimes, God is called the one who sees but is not seen. And Amichai has taken that and turned it around. I want a God who is seen but does not see. And why? What's his purpose? And what do you think about that purpose? And what kind of energy or emotion informs him saying this, whom I can lead around in order to tell him about that which he does not see?
Perhaps it's getting away from the idea of God as all-powerful, that God needs human assistance, that there might actually be things that God doesn't see and needs humans to point it out to God.
Yeah. I want a God who is seen but does not see, whom I can lead around in order to tell him about that which he does not see.
I recognize myself in the first 2 lines of that stanza, a God that I can lead around. I mean, I find myself a little saying that, and my friends know, if I were God, that's not how I would be running the world. That's the God I would lead around to run the world that I think the way it should be run in that particular instance.
All right. You're going to be taking care of the house. Let me show you the essential parts of what you need to be taking care of when you do the house sitting. I want a God who is seen but does not see, whom I can lead around in order to tell him about that which he does not see. It is quite striking, going back to what Susan was saying, I want a God who is seen but does not see. I want such a God. I want to be able to have that kind of control, as it were, or that kind of dialogue. I want to level the playing field so that this is possible, so that I can say to God, you're not paying attention to that, whatever that happens to be, or you missed that. Do you hear the implications of great tragedies, of the Shoah, or of any great tragedy? I'm just going to tell you about that, what you apparently you don't see it. You just don't see it.
I was struck by that line, reminding me of Hagar. When Hagar runs away from Sarai and says, it's a desperate situation, and God comes to her and says, you need to go back. And she says, you've seen, and she says, I'll call you, I think, El Roy. It's like the first example, I think, of a character in the Bible being seen or feeling seen by God.
Yeah.
That line, like that craving to be seen, like nurturingly, but not necessarily the other parts of not having the unpleasant parts of ourselves.
Yes. Yes. I agree. And thanks for the example, the Hagar example. Be'er lechai ro'i, el ro'i, God who sees. Hold on a second. Okay. God who is seen but does not see. It seems strikingly undermining, doesn't it, of a conventional view of God? Even if you set aside the word theology, doesn't it seem like some kind of theological thread or framework that God sees everything? But that's not what Amichai says that he wants here, at least not in the first case. And God is not seen according to the conventional rules of theology. But again, that's what he's trying to undermine here. I want a God who is seen but does not see, whom I can lead around in order to tell him about that which he does not see. But what else does he want? Yeah, he also wants the opposite. And I want a God who is seen and who sees. I want both of those things. I want to see how he covers his eyes like a child playing blind man's bluff. Well, what does he want to see, and what's the implicit critique, or what's the emotion here that you discern? I want a God who is seen and who sees. I want to see how he covers his eyes like a child playing blind man's bluff. I can't believe it. That's really what God does. Omniscience and omnipotence, closing its eyes to human beings. I gotta see that. A God who's groping around in the dark for something like that. I want to see that. I want to see that God who doesn't see. And the God who isn't seen, the God who is seen but doesn't see, I want to lead him around in order to tell him what he's not seeing. So these are two pretty extraordinary critiques, would you say? Yeah, Adina.
It occurs to me, I love this poem and I've read it many times, but I only now realize that what I read here is it's still a theological statement in the sense that it's a description of God about what God can do and what God cannot do, but there is no relationship, there's no described need for any kind of relationship with humans or with a poet about what God means to him or what he means to God. There's only a description and a general description of what God can do. And it's really striking. There's no, yeah.
Thank you. No interaction here. No
And
interaction.
no caring about humans.
Right. And no caring about humans. Wow. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, Debbie.
I don't-
I don't see that. What I see is that theology isn't God at all. It's theology is what man wants it to be. Doesn't necessarily, God's not necessarily involved.
Uh-huh.
Um, it's confusing. He wants to see God's vulnerability. Well, God isn't vulnerable. We are vulnerable. I've lost the poem. I can't pull it up again. Somewhere in there it says, "I will." What is "I will"? It's I want, I want, I want, I will, I want. What I can't read the poem anymore. I've lost it.
Doesn't say I will.
I thought it said
In
will.
the third stanza, it's I want a God like a window. And if I open it, I will see the heavens
I will see. Okay.
while myself staying in the house. Debbie, do you not see the sharing of the screen?
No, I've lost it. I'll have to log off and then log back on. It's okay.
Oh, okay.
I just don't see it. This is what we want God to be. Well, we don't get what we want. God is what God is. So the theology is for us. It's not for God. It's not of God. It's
Uh-huh.
Well, yeah, this is from our point of view.
Say it again, Gene.
Well, this is, it's for our point of view. It's written by a human.
yeah.
But what I got out of the second part of it was when he wants God to see, but then covers his eyes. It's like, how's he going to deal with what he has to see? You mentioned the Shoah. It's like, well, if he really sees it, is he going to cover his eyes? Is that what the reaction is going to be? Like a child playing blind man's bluff? So he's looking for a reaction when he does see what we see.
Is there, yeah. Is there some kind of, yeah, Norman?
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me. I want a very simple God, is what I hear. And in doing that, I get away with reasonableness and othernesses. Having said that, I want a an epoch that tells you something that you might want to learn from. And finally, I think it would be a big waste of time if we try to do all the things that every other elogist, if we we force them to put them in a kind of intellectual prison that they can't live in. Having said that, of course, I want healthy children at all times.
It almost sounds like this person wants all these things, wants this God, but doesn't want to take any responsibility for his or her side of it. Wants all this from God. I want you to be there. I want you to not be there. I want you to be there when I want you there. I don't have to do anything.
I want to observe.
That's that simple God that I think Norman was talking about. Just be there. Just be there in case I need you, in case I want to see you. Just be there and I'll do my own thing.
Well, now we can move this to the third stanza, where the idea of being in the house once again, domesticated God. What can I expect? What's the behavior? What are the four walls that will limit and delimit what it is that Theo is capable of doing or able to do, despite the distractions of what's going on the midrash, on the soccer field, let's say. I want a God like a window. You see, the house element again. I want a God like a window, that if I open it, I will see the heavens while myself staying in the house. Well, that's what a number of you, Sabine was talking about it, and I think Norman was also talking about it, about the simplicity of God and stripping down the relationship. Let's say, I don't want to be implicated in it. I just want to be able to observe. I would like to be able to observe this. I want a God like a window, that if I open it, I will see the heavens while myself staying in the house.
Well, I don't want.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't want to shame other people.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to me that a lot of what I read in the story was don't do what you did to others did.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want it anyway. And I don't want it.
Right. Right. Thank you. I want a God like a window, that if I open it, I will see the heavens while myself staying in the house. I want a God who is like a door that opens only outward.
You don't want to let God come in. You just want to check to see, like with Theo, just check to see if he's not playing with the bad guys. Just, Theo, I see you. You can come in now, but I know you're okay.
Well, with a door that opens only outward, you're pushing against, you're not allowing for easy access, right? It's not like it's not like God or somebody can push right past you because of the way in which you are opening the door. I want a God who is like a door that opens only outward. So here's somebody, does he know what, what?
But God is like a door that swings on its hinge in and out.
Right.
So there's a realization at the end.
It's not to engaged with God. I don't want to be engaged with God. I want God engaged with me.
Mhm.
I don't want to have to think about that.
Mhm.
Is that what he's saying?
You know, I don't know. I get stuck here with the image of a door on a pivot, on a pivot hinge that goes, not necessarily a revolving door that goes round and round and round, but I always picture when I read this poem the door between the dining room and the kitchen of the house in which I grew up, which would pivot on a hinge this way or that. And my mother insisted that when you approach that door, you have to say, "Coming through," so that you don't end up with an accident because two people are trying to come through the door at the same time. God is like a door that swings on its hinge in and out and continues to swing through its arc without beginning, without end.
But we have to let it swing toward us, or it's not going to swing that way. So we have to be engaged with it. This is about being engaged with God, I guess. I think.
I think there's also an image of, there's also a certain kind of child image of swings. Children play on swings. And so I was struck by, like, maybe something allows you to have the courage to go be near this other kind of God. But it does take something of flexibility and something of a different kind of childhood experience of going in and out.
Thank you. It does take flexibility, and it takes into account the necessity of your own experience. Well, it's not just out and it's not just in, and you really have to pay attention because you could get smacked. You could get hurt. Sarah, it seemed like you had no? Okay, yeah, Jean.
As I'm reading through to the end of this, obviously, it seems to me that maybe this is kind of a little bit autobiographical of himself seeing himself as a child and then growing up and realizing that God is not all these things that he says. You mentioned about the beginning about, want dad, but you can't really do that with God. He's God swings on its hinge in and out, and there's an arc, but it's never beginning and without a beginning and without end. So it's like kind of like a grown-up statement after all these kind of childlike whims.
That's interesting. He kind of grows up at the end or with his final statement, and it sounds almost liturgical, doesn't it? B'li reshit, b'li acharit. Yeah, it sounds a lot like Adon Olam. Yeah, b'li reshit, b'li acharit. Yeah, Pnima v'hachutza al svivotea tisov, which is a phrase that he takes out of Ecclesiastes. That the wind keeps swiveling around and going around and around and around on its hinges. And then he photoshops in something that seems liturgical. B'li reshit, b'li acharit, without beginning, without end. Well, Debbie, you do have to interact with this God, don't you? Don't make the mistake of thinking that you can just construct the God who is like a window, who gives you a window and a view on the world, and you can just open and look without you being implicated. It doesn't matter whether it's raining or what the conditions are outside. You're inside. And no, that's really not going to happen. And I also, as long as I have a wish list going, I want a God who's like a door that opens only outward. Well, isn't that nice that that's what you want, but that's not what you're going to get. That's not what you get. So construct your theology any way you want it. Write the script any way that you want it. But God is not that domesticated. Even within the house, it's possible to open the door the wrong way or to get hits, to get smacked. This is the living experience. I have no earthly idea about God. That very tense bat mitzvah mother said to me, I have no earthly idea about God. Well, maybe we should explore some earthly images here. What's the God that you would like to have? How does that comport with your experience of what you do have? You want a God who sees, you want a God who doesn't see, a God who needs to be led around, a God who leads you around, a window that only opens out or a door that only opens out. Well, that's just not going to happen. Well, how do you account for that? He doesn't give us an account for it. He just tells us that it's true, that that's the way of the world. Even within the house, Teo's mother can call him home, but still in all, God's behavior is not predictable. There is no,
But not controllable either.
and not controllable either. Yes, quite. Jewish theology. Theo. In my youth, I knew a boy whose name was Theodore, like Herzl, but his mother called him Theo. Theo, come home from the playground. Theo, don't hang around with the bad kids. Theo, log, yeah. I want a God who is seen but does not see, whom I can lead around in order to tell him about that which he does not see. And I want a God who is seen and who sees. I want to see how he covers his eyes, like a child playing blind man's bluff. I want to see how it is that he does this. How does he justify doing it? I don't know. It's a critique of lawlessness or helplessness or hopelessness in a world supposedly controlled by a God who sees everything. I want to see, all right, make that part of my theology, that God sees. But in my theology, a God who sees also covers the divine eyes, because there are some things that clearly God's not seeing or not paying it, not attending to. I want a God like a window, that if I open it, I will see the heavens while myself staying in the house. I want a God who is like a door that opens only outward. Oh, how lovely that would be. But God is like a door that swings on its hinge, in and out, and continues to swing through its arc without beginning, without end. Do we have a hope of describing and predicting behavior? No. We can say whether, whether God exists or not. It's in the house, it's in the home, it's in the yard, it's in the playground, it's in the images, it's in the imagination, it's in the liturgy, it's in the very stuff of which the house itself is made. Whether, W-H-E-T-H-E-R, for sure. But the weather, W-E-A-T-H-E-R, you're going to be implicated. You can't just open the window. You can't just open the door and stay inside. If it's raining, you're going to get wet. If it's cold, you're going to get cold. And that's the reality of it. Teo, log, yeah. And don't forget that Yah is specially pointed. to remind us that this isn't just some kind of pun. This isn't some kind of cheer or refrain of a Beatles song or a parade. This is serious, a serious matter. How it is that we perceive the density of divine experience in the world. Well, Amichai has perhaps more to say about this kind of issue and how it is that we deal with, as Norman was saying, with something that seems so simple on the face of it, but turns out to be much more complicated as we get more implicated in it. More about that another time. But for now, let me just say, have a good Thanksgiving. Be thankful for what there is to be thankful for.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah, and enjoy.
At the same time.
Yeah. Enjoy the confluence of things, and may your basketball teams do well. Right? And thanks, Diane. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Night.
לילה טוב.